Good afternoon and welcome to today's version of Curated Insights Live. I'm Seth Deckman. I'm your host. I'm the president and owner and founder of the Keynote Curators. We work with organizations all over the world providing keynote speakers for your events and your conferences. So today I want to talk about the perfect fitting speaker. But more importantly, does that really exist? Often, my clients that entrust me with their conferences are asking me to find the perfect fit. And after almost 20 years in the business, I can tell you it's not a one sided relationship where I am just tasked with a search and then I have to provide a bunch of recommendations and then we go ahead and make the choice and book it. It's more of a two-way street. Often the perfect fitting speaker for somebody is out of budget or is unattainable or isn't taking events anymore for that year. They're all booked up. So that requires a little bit of flexibility and a little bit of artistry, if you will, creativity in how you create the context and how a choice is made that everybody can agree, this makes sense. This is the perfect fitting speaker. So I want to share with you a story that happened this year on a booking where we had an initial idea of a perfect fitting speaker and it didn't fit, but we ultimately ended up with somebody else who was really the perfect fitting speaker. So it's a large manufacturer and they have an event every other year. And so this was this year, the first live event back after COVID. And they wanted to make a little bit of a splash. And their manufacturing marketplace, they manufacture vehicles, had really transformed during the pandemic. And they had opened up a new demographic in their marketplace, much, much younger and much more plugged into technology and um, sustainability and a lot of the core virtues of the generation Y and Z, if you will. So they came to me and they said, hey, we're a vehicle manufacturer and our production is moving faster than it ever has during COVID. We're one of the businesses that has been fortunate enough to have an expansion, and not only an expansion, but that our market and our demographics are changing very quickly at high velocity. And their internal marketing team and their event team had thought, hey, why don't we get a race car driver? Why don't we get somebody with a name, somebody be an interesting interview, and that would attract um, more attendees to the event because they really wanted to make a splash coming back. So what happens is they come up with a couple of names that are double, some are even triple what their budget was. So when I ended up getting on the phone with them, I said, okay, well, velocity sounds catchy and it makes sense because things are moving fast post COVID and everybody's rushing back to the marketplace and rushing back to all sorts of activity at events and conferences. But let's dig a little bit deeper. And I just want to stop there and invite anybody who's listening. You can pop in your questions. You can direct message me. You can find us on the web and send an email or call us at any time. This is free form. You do not need to wait for a question and answer period. So when I got on the phone with the marketing team and the conference team, and I asked them to just tell me in their own words what they meant about velocity, I began to understand that not only was the marketplace changing for younger buyers, but that it was more diverse buyers. And diverse can mean a lot of things. It doesn't need to be black or white or LGBTQ. It could be urban versus rural. It could be families versus um, families with children, without children. I even think of diversity as, dog people versus cat people. So diversity is a very broad swath, but it became clear to me that there new marketplace that they were trying to direct their dealers towards and their distributors towards was younger, much more diverse, and had different core values and different core virtues than their historically strong demographic of buyers. So I had to set the stage and first of all let them know that we could go ahead and be open to speakers that were, more within their budget, which would maybe lower name recognition, but that we could really get a strong message going forward. And they were like, absolutely. And I said, look, the reason is what's more important is the name or to have a really strong message? Because the fact of the matter is their attendance was going to be more about what this manufacturer was providing to their dealers. It wasn't going to wholeheartedly just hinge on one named speaker. They had a lot of initiatives. They had a lot of new programs, marketing programs, sales initiatives, and people had not met for over 2 years. So this was kind of built in and baked in that they were going to have good attendance. So I reached into my network because I worked with a lot of race car drivers and a lot of people that would fit the velocity theme, and I found a woman who is the owner of the only female Indy car team. Her name is Beth Peretta. She'd been in the car business for a long time. So she knew vehicles, she knew distributors, she knew dealerships, she knew the business model. She also represented a younger demographic. She also represented diversity, a female in a predominantly man's world. And she was an extraordinary speaker and had a lot of great stories to tell. And she was well within budget. Our conversations began to have a new spark to them, and there were some great ideas around marketing where they could bring Beth in and tell her story and talk about velocity and the importance of being fast but not being hurried, being quick but don't be rushed, and always being focused on what's important with your team. As the only female owner of a Indy racing car team, a female driver, female mechanic, female engineer, female pit crew, this was a breakthrough. And that's what was happening with the buyer. They were having a breakthrough in the marketplace. So it began to take shape. I felt that with the 50th anniversary of Title IX this year, that we could bring in a journalist, specifically a sports journalist who's known for her work in women's sports, Christine Brennan, to do an interview and to bring Beth and Christine together on stage, as opposed to a keynote, that it could be a conversation where the manufacturer, my buyer, would have a hand in the through line and the common thread of the questions that were going to be asked during this moderated conversation to ensure that they could weave in an artful manner with the journalist, with the sports journalist, Christine Brennan, to make sure that the initiatives and the messaging would be folded in, but in an artful way. So we got everybody on the phone before we made the offer, and everybody was into it. Beth, Christine, the buyer, we made the offer, everything was accepted. And then we began to shape the conversation. Now, we get to the event, which is in Savannah, Georgia, and there's a lot of buzz and excitement. One of the great things about the speakers I work with, and particularly with Beth and Christine, is they came to the early breakfast the day before. They walked through the expo. They looked at all the vehicles. They got inside the vehicles. They took some selfies. They talked to the dealers, to the sales managers, got a great understanding from the CEO and the president about the initiatives. And this had all happened on the pre-event calls, but it takes a different shape and form when it's done in person. So the day comes, we get to the event, we do the sound check, and everything's great. And we couldn't have had a richer conversation. We get to the Q&A, and you start hearing about dealers and distributors of these vehicles who are sharing stories about their challenges of bringing in a diverse sales force or a diverse service center, whether that's women, African Americans, Latinos, Asians, LGBTQ, whatever it is, so that when a buyer comes into their dealership, they're represented. If you have a couple who is same-sex marriage, for example, not that you need to have a salesperson who is also in a same-sex marriage, but somebody that they could identify with, or at least has an awareness and an understanding of that. And in Beth and Christine's conversation, they talked about really what diversity is. And it's not, if you have a boardroom table, the metaphor that was used was, it's not if we want to displace somebody who's already at the table, but why can't you make the table longer or bigger or more round so there's another seat or two or three or four so that it becomes inclusive rather than displacing people? And that became an important point in the conversation at the conference, because many of the distributors and dealers were kind of old school, more traditional, conservative even. And there's fear that, hey, new people are coming in and I'm going to be kicked out. No, we need your experience. We need your authority, your know-how, your knowledge, and we want to all expand together. So it started out as a speaker search for somebody who was 2 or even 3 times the amount. And they were looking for a name, looking for a name, looking for a name. And we ended up with somebody who was not necessarily a household name, coupled with a journalist that was able to do a professional moderation. And that happened 6 or 7 months ago. And I'm still getting messages about that event from the buyer. And in fact, the buyer became a sponsor for Beth's race car team. So she was rolling around in one of their vehicles, which was kind of became a very cool ancillary piece of it in the end. So you start out with an idea what the perfect speaker is. You end up with a different speaker, but they actually are the perfect speaker. So does it exist? Yes, it does, but it takes flexibility on the buyer side. It takes coming to me and helping me understand in detail and depth about what the need is, so that I can go ahead and make that perfect match. And together we can make the case as to why, how it frames up, what the context is, so it can all fit together. This isn't just like clicking things off on a list, finding a bunch of speakers that match that search, and then sending them off and you tell me who you like. This is a real partnership, a collaboration, a real conversation, looking at the pros and cons and finding a way to make the case to best serve those in attendance and best serve the buyer. So the perfect speaker does exist, but it may not look exactly what you think it looks like. So with that said, I just wanted to share that story about, does the perfect speaker exist? Yes, it does, but it's not always going to look exactly what you think it looks like. So with that, I will take any direct messages, any emails, any reach out that you have to me, and we can begin to do that same process with you or any of your colleagues or partners that you work with to find that perfect speaker, because it does exist. All righty. Thank you so much. And I enjoyed this live conversation, and we'll see you next time.